Hello, BookTube. We're continuing our read along of Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. This is the second book in her trilogy of books set in Tudor England, Tudor historical fiction, centering very closely on the figure of Thomas Cromwell, the lawyer and parliament member and general all around leg breaker to Henry VIII. Uh, and we've been following the turn of the story here, which takes its momentum from events in the first book in the series, Wolf Hall. I maintain that you don't need to read these books in order, but it helps if you do. But it's in Wolf Hall that we see with lots of things going on. We get introduced to the whole narrative style of Hilary Mantel. We get introduced to Cromwell and a lot of our main cast of characters. This book efficiently reintroduces you to those characters, so that's not an issue. But we see in the novel Wolf Hall, among many other things that are going on there, we see that King Henry VIII is growing disenchanted with his wife, Anne Boleyn. His queen, Catherine of Aragon, has been rusticated. She is out of court, and Henry wanted a breath of new reformation in his church, to dance a delicate line between reformation and actual tradition. But he also wanted a son, a legitimate male heir, and was certain that he could not have one anymore with Catherine. That was a big allure of Anne Boleyn. In addition to how alluring she was on her own, there was also that a new wife would get him sons, the son that he needs to carry on his dynasty. And that famously doesn't happen. Elizabeth is their daughter, and there are other mishaps, phantom pregnancies, miscarriages, the rumor of a monstrous birth, to the point where anyone, and especially Henry, looks at that procession of misfortune and says, this marriage is no more going to get me a male heir than my first marriage did. And his lust starts to migrate as well. Anne is portrayed by Hilary Mantel as a shrew, high-strung, demanding, petulant, imperious, and it is heavily implied in Wolf Hall, and it's made totally explicit in this book, that Henry wants the opposite of that. He has come to a point now where he wants the opposite of that. He wants a meek and mild young woman. And there's one ready to hand at Wolf Hall itself, at the building called Wolf Hall itself. There is Jane Seymour, the younger daughter of the Seymour family, long-standing, deep-rooted courtier family of the Seymours. She is everything that Anne Boleyn is not. Meek and quiet, pious and accommodating to Henry in his every whim. And he's an older man now. Huge and older. Doesn't have quite the fire of the make-up and break-up chemistry that he had originally with Anne Boleyn. But Anne Boleyn is still queen. We're at the section of the book now called Angels, which is set during the winter of 1535 and then up to January of 1536. And that might seem a little arbitrary, but there is an event. There is a thing that Hilary Mantel, when she's looking over the planning of these novels, there is an event that she wants to be the signpost event of this section of the book, I believe. And it takes place in 1536, in January 1536. So it's a natural ending point to this section of the story, in which Anne Boleyn is starting to feel how thin the branch is on which she sits. She is more and more caustic and threatening to Cromwell, who very much helped to put her where she is, to raise her and her family so high. Despite the scanty regard that Cromwell's mentor, Cardinal Wolsey, had for Anne Boleyn's father, Cromwell has still helped to advance her, and yet she is so imperious that she seems not aware of that, like we mentioned last time. She tells him at one point very pointedly in this section of the book that those who are made can be unmade. And the closest he can come to threatening the queen is to say, I entirely agree. Because she's talking about him, but he's talking about her. It all comes from the king. All favor comes from the king. If that favor is withdrawn, the guards are right at the doorway. But Anne still believes that she can do it. Their daughter Elizabeth is thriving. She is not a sickly child. So she has proven that she can give birth to healthy children. And she is still hoping that the allure, that the hold that she's had over Henry all this time will work. And in the section called Angels, she is, at the end of the section, she is given what she thinks is the greatest boost to that chance imaginable, aside from actually giving birth to a male heir. And that is that the old queen dies. Catherine of Aragon dies. She has been rusticated to a country villa. We are told that it's drafty, that the air is unhealthy, that it's cold in the winter. She's been rusticated there, away from her daughter. One of the cruelest things that this cruel monarch did was to systematically deprive Catherine of Aragon of even seeing her daughter, Mary, who would go on to be Queen of England. In this book, especially in this section, Thomas Cromwell has to explain that heartless rationale a couple of times. That we don't want any conniving. Both Catherine of Aragon and the Princess Mary have strong continental ties with enemies of England. We don't want anything like that. We don't want them communicating. It's not the question of them being mother and daughter. It's the question of them both conniving against the interests of the kingdom. And in this section, word reaches the court that Catherine is dying. Eustace Chapuis, the imperial ambassador, the ambassador from Catherine's own kinsman, wants to go and visit her, and is at first denied permission. No one who's known Catherine, a pious and unimaginative but pious woman, no one wants to be cruel to her other than the king. And even the king doesn't always want to be cruel to her. No one likes the idea of her dying alone in some forbidding country manner, surrounded by ladies-in-waiting who are not her own ladies-in-waiting, who are enemies of hers, plants of the Boleyn family. No one likes that at all. There's a scene in this section where Thomas Cromwell receives a petition from Lady Willoughby, who's actually came over from Spain with Catherine and married into an English family, who says, I insist, if she is dying, I want her to have at least one friendly face around her. If you don't let me go, you'll have to lock me up in a closet. I'll go on my own through snow. Cromwell, in this story, in this telling, he comes up with a ruse for her to get to see Catherine. But Catherine seems to recover. But it's an illusion, as it often is with fatally ill patients. They seem to recover, and then the end comes to them. And we get it wonderfully described. I want to read you that section of this. It's the only thing from this section that I'll read you. We get it wonderfully described. At 10 in the morning, a priest anoints her, touching the holy oil to her eyelids and lips, her hands and feet. These lids will now seal and not reopen. She will neither look nor see. These lips have finished their prayers. These hands will sign no more papers. These feet have finished their journey. By noon, her breathing is stertorous, and she is laboring to her end. At 2 o'clock, light cast into her chamber by the fields of snow, she resigns from life. As she draws her last breath, the somber form of her keepers close in. They are reluctant to disturb the aged chaplain and the old women shuffling from her bedside. Before they have washed her, her keeper has put his fastest rider on the road. Because this is big news, that Catherine has died. As is said many times in this section of the book, the emperor, her nephew, might be willing to make serious amounts of trouble for England, even up to the border of war, for a living kinswoman, but not for a dead woman. Not for a princess he's never seen and never heard of, who's half English. And so a great weight seems to be lifted, not only from the affairs of England, which are no longer as explicitly threatened by the emperor as they once were, but also from Henry himself. Because now, at least when it comes to the question of Catherine, there are no more questions about the legitimacy of his marriage, the illegitimacy of his marriage, one thing or another. One thing we know for sure when Catherine of Aragon dies is that Henry is a widower. Well, that's one thing that we know for sure. Oh, I said I wasn't going to read you anything else, but there is another section. I wonder if I can find it quickly. Because the question goes on, and Cromwell, of course, knows very well the ways of lawyers, and feels that it could go on forever. I wonder if I'll be able to find that section. Let me see. Let's give it a try, just in case. You all put up with me anyway. Uh, Hang on just a second. I didn't mark it, because I thought I would only read you one section, but I actually want to read you two. I actually want to read you that other one. Uh, no, I won't be able to find it. Well, that it doesn't matter. There's a wonderful little meditation where Cromwell imagines that dead lawyers will be arguing this thing in crypts forever on whether or not Catherine actually slept with King Henry's older brother, Arthur, when they were wed. She maintained right all the way to the end that she did not. And that therefore she was a virgin when Henry came to her, and that their marriage was completely legitimate. It doesn't matter anyway, whether you're in this ultra-religious era or now, it doesn't matter anyway. The Bible explicitly contradicts itself on the subject of whether or not a man should marry his brother's widow. So there's a verse that says he should, and there's a verse that says he shouldn't. Plain as day, two black and white contradictions. So the Bible's no help to you one way or another. But just because the old queen is gone doesn't mean Anne Boleyn can rest easy, because the king is obviously infatuated with Jane Seymour and seriously thinking about what happened to him. How did he lose his head to this Boleyn girl? Was there witchcraft involved? Is it a real marriage? Was she pre-contracted to Harry Percy? He starts to have all of these doubts. Doubts that he certainly would not have had if Anne Boleyn's first child had been a boy. A healthy boy. I think it's safe to say that. Henry would still have been lustful, but it would have been discreet. It would never have threatened the crown. If his first son with her had been if his first child with her had been a boy, all of this would be different. But it didn't happen that way, and now that branch she's sitting on is creaking underneath her. So that is the section here that we're dealing with today, angels. The only other element of interest, the only other moment of interest in here, is something that is a little vexed. It's something that Hilary Mantel really has to do. She paints herself into a corner with the way she wants to characterize Thomas Cromwell, her main character, who dreams about putting the unemployed men of England to work on roads and fortifications. Let's put them to work. Let's make a works program, a WPA, as it were, who has hundreds of people that he's feeding every day from the slums of London and whatnot. Hilary Mantel has dreamed up this Cromwell, a Cromwell who is a man's man, a mensch. He is as independent as a servant of the king can be. He is forward-thinking. He is righteous and compassionate. And that might be fine in odd, unscripted moments in the story of Henry Tudor and Thomas Cromwell, but it won't work whenever Cromwell sidewise crabs his way onto stage, into the historical record. Whenever that happens, whether the record is reliable or not, the record is of a horrible person. Hilary Mantel knows this. She knows this. When she's writing these books, she knows as much about this guy as anybody does in the world. So she knows when she has to trim things just a bit. And there are other legends about Cromwell. And one of them that is immortalized in a great scene from The Six Wives of Henry VIII, that old BBC production. Some of you might know that old BBC production. Really good. Very much worth rewatching. If you can find it on a streaming service. It's a moment that's immortalized there, but it had existed in historical folklore ever since these days, ever since the 1530s, which is that Henry, although the model of a prince for all of Europe, sometimes manhandled Cromwell. Not just verbally browbeat him, but would cuff him or smack him. And the typical line among Henry biographers and anatomists of the time has been that Henry could be both. He could be the first prince of Europe and also cuff Cromwell, and that the thing that would allow him to do that is that Cromwell was baseborn. And that someone like Henry would not have thought of Cromwell as completely human in the way that we do. But by the time you get to the halfway point in this book, there is absolutely no way that Mantel's Cromwell would put up with that. And we're actually told that in the section Angels. Cromwell hears that there is scuttlebutt around London that Henry has cuffed him, beat him in the head, slapped him for his impertinence or his failure to do something or other. And Cromwell says to himself, well, they just don't know Henry. He would never do that. And I would never put up with it. If he did it, I would walk away. Uh, that's the closest that we get to that moment in this book. I believe that moment happened. I believe it happened more than once. But you can't do it. Not with the Cromwell that Mantell has created here, who has far, far more of what we would call personal dignity than Cromwell had at the time, or that was even thinkable to him to have. He would have considered this book a heresy. but we can't. You can't read about a character like that and think he's the hero. So we don't. But anyway, that is the section Angels. We will move on. The problem with the rest of this book is that the next section is the Black Book, and it is long. And then the section after that is Master of Phantoms, which is enormously long. It's 200 pages long. So we're going to have to break up Master of Phantoms, I think. We might have to break up the Black Book as well. Final section of the book is short, but the next upcoming ones are longer. That's okay. I love talking about this book. So we'll wrap up Angels for now, and we'll move on to the next section, which is the Black Book, which takes place from January of 1536 to April, to early spring of 1536. So we'll do that next time for our read-along, our crawl-through, Bring Up the Bodies. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.